Hello, today we are going to be talking about gender and cultural stereotypes by looking at three of our global contemporary artworks, starting with Rebellious Silence, and then No Crying Aloud in the Barbershop, and then Praying Mantra. Three very different, very interesting artworks. So first up, why don't you go ahead and find 235 Rebellious Silence in your note-taking book. I'll find it in my notes too because I'm not ready. But this is Rebellious Silence from the Women of Allah series. Shireen Nishat. So Shireen Nishat is the artist, but this artwork by Shireen Nishat is a photo that someone else took. That was probably confusing the way that I explained this, but she is the artist who, she's a photographer. She often takes photos like this and kind of writes on top of them. And for this one, it's a self-portrait. So Cynthia Preston took this photograph of her. But for all intents and purposes, we should consider Shireen Nishat the artist. And this was created in 1994, ink on photographs. So I'll just give you a second to look at this portrait that we have here. So our lesson today is about gender and culture stereotypes. So I don't know kind of what your initial thoughts were when you were looking at this portrait. Maybe you thought that it was kind of startling or maybe confrontational with the eye contact and the barrel of the gun across her face. Maybe you have like thoughts about maybe oppression or violence or I don't know what you're thinking about, but we're going to talk about it. So first I would like to start with this video clip of Shireen Nishat talking about her artworks.
When did you visit Iran the last time?
The last time was 1996.
In the 90s also you started this Women of Allah, the photos. So you were dealing with exile, with women in Arabic states, in Persia. Are you a feminist artist?
This question has been asked for me a lot, and once I asked my audience, do you think I'm a feminist? They all said yes. So okay, if you think I'm a feminist, I have no problem. I'm extremely interested in women in the way that their lives, no matter which country, what culture they come from, and that it's always this duality of being extremely fragile and vulnerable, and yet extremely strong and defiant.
When the Islamic Revolution swept through Iran in 1979, Shireen Nishat was living in the U.S. She didn't return to Iran for another decade. These photos are her response to the country's altered cultural landscape. They're ambiguous. They can be interpreted in many different ways.
Okay, so we're going to talk about her history as an artist and also those different interpretations that we have of her artworks. Before I move from this slide though, the other videos that I have linked here, this is her TED Talk that she gave a couple of years ago. And then this was just a really great video that I found of her giving advice to young people, which I thought was really amazing. Okay, so Shireen Nishat is an Iranian artist. So some kind of content for you about Iran. In the 40s and 50s, the Shah, which we know is the ruler of the Persian Empire or monarchy, think back to our Shahnameh, right, the Book of the Kings. Here I am. The Shah, supported by Britain and US, took power in 1941 and modernized Iran with Western culture. So Iran became Western, so it was it looked more like the US and Britain in kind of its cultures and traditions, which is kind of not what we would expect. And it became more progressive towards women's rights. So this was in the 40s and the 50s. Nishat was born in Iran in 1957, kind of in the midst of this revolution of sorts. During this time, women had the right to education. She was exposed to ancient Persian literary tradition, and she loved the poetry of Persian culture. She grew up reading things just like our Shahnameh that we studied. In the 70s, she had been attending a Catholic school where she received a Western and Iranian education. And then her father moved her to California to continue her education there. So she leaves Iran as this very progressive Western culture. But in 1979, the Shah, whose kind of military regime had been more and more violent and repressive politically and towards Muslims, he was overthrown. So we have this Shah who's very supportive of Western culture, education of women, etc. He is overthrown because he has been repressing Muslim religious freedom. And this is the Islamic Revolution. And as a result, they establish a very conservative religious government. And many of the people who fought for this revolution were women. They were Iranian Muslim women. They wanted kind of their religious freedom back, their freedom to kind of practice as they wanted. And many of those women wore a chador, and I hope that I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's this full body cloak that we have here that Shireen Nishat has depicted herself wearing. So I'm trying to make that stop happening. So we have this revolution in it's 1979. And then in 1990, about 10 years later, Shireen Nishat returns to Iran. And it is not the country that she left. They have rolled back 50 years of women's rights, all of their progressive Western culture. She said, after kind of returning to her country that felt nothing like her home, I can never call any place home. I will forever be in a state of in between. And despite the freedom that these Muslim women gained religiously, they still were determined to kind of regain their other rights that they had under the Shah. And currently, Iran is still very oppressive for women, but they've made very big gains since 1979, that revolution. I have another quote for you. It says, the reality of contemporary feminism in Iran is that resistance is an essential part of a woman's experience. As a result, women are very tough, the exact opposite of the outside image we have of these women. My attempt has always been to reveal the layers of unpredictability and strength that are not so evident on the surface. So let's dive into what she's choosing to depict here in this self-portrait. So often in her work, she wants to depict oppositions, contradictions, paradoxes. So these things that kind of take us off guard, they are not what we expect. And sometimes they can be very initially disturbing, right? Like this very direct, kind of aggressive, strong eye contact through the barrel of a gun. And they kind of disturb us initially, but then they also make us think, right? Contemporary art is a lot about concept. So after Nishat returned to the US from her visit to Iran. She began working on her Women of Allah series as a way to kind of reconcile her feelings about Iran, which she had at one point considered her home. So this series is a series of black and white photos of Iranian female revolutionaries. Nishat posed for some of the photos like we have here, and then she added contemporary poetry by Iranian female poets. And she would handwrite the Farsi poetry in calligraphy across the parts of their bodies that were still exposed. So here she is in her studio writing the Farsi poetry on this portrait here. And initially, maybe you thought it was maybe Arabic or verses from the Quran, but it's actually something very secular. So we have maybe some preconceived notions about that too. So these are her favorite poems, and often very feminist in nature, because she did grow up in that very kind of progressive female Iran. Now, let's talk about the gun in this portrait here. So, each of the Women of Allah photos contains a gun, and it's either held very kind of passively, like this one, or it's pointed at the viewer. And this is a kind of symbol or a suggestion of inner strength and this revolutionary intent of women. That video that we watched talked about how women have to be revolutionary and revolutionaries just in their lives to fight for kind of their rights and all that they need. So here we have guns as this kind of symbol of that, but we also know that guns are very dangerous, right? So it suggests the kind of danger that they have for fighting for their rights. All right, so let's talk about maybe some stereotypes that we have living in a Western country like the US. So, the chador that she's wearing oftentimes is seen as something that makes someone maybe weaker or subordinate and oppressed. But when she was growing up in the 1970s, wearing a chador was a symbol of rebellion before the Islamic Revolution because the Shah forbade it. He didn't want Iranians to be different. He thought that this would ostracize them from Western culture. So he said no one is allowed to wear this long black covering. He forbade it. So when women wore this, it was this act of rebellion through their choice. It was a choice that they were making, and it was not something that made them oppressed or subordinate. It was this act of rebellion. So that kind of paradox of something that maybe we perceive as weak, but something that is actually very strong. And women wanted to wear a chador because they believe it protects women's bodies from becoming sexualized objects of the male gaze. Now, we've talked about that. Oops. Uh-oh. Am I still going? I am. Okay. Whew. So we've talked about the male gaze before as this kind of viewpoint in which women are sexualized objects. They're not seen for their personalities and their experiences and their emotions. So the chador for these women were seen as this kind of way to protect themselves and kind of empower themselves, right? Make themselves more than just a body. And then lastly, we have her very, very direct gaze at the viewer. And when we see direct eye contact with portraits of women, it is something that is very humanizing, right? There is something about looking someone in the eye rather than having them look off in the distance, or maybe we don't even see their face or their head. And it's very powerful. And many feminist artists like Shirin Nishat have used this idea of direct gazing back to the viewer to break free from centuries of male desire. And then last kind of symbolism and content that we have for you is this gun that we have here, dividing this very symmetrical, high contrast composition in half, suggesting perhaps her internal conflict between tradition of Islamic religious culture and the kind of modern Western culture that she grew up with, the East versus the West in the world, beauty versus violent. Shireen Nishat, through her artwork, is trying to kind of reconcile all of these different ideas of two very different Irans that she knew and now knows today. So that's Shireen Nishat's work. Our next work is very different. We are going to switch to No Crying Allowed in the Barber Shop, which is 236, by Pepon Osorio, 1944, mixed media installation. So I picked this one because we don't really look at that many installations, and I think that installations in the contemporary world tend to kind of catch people off guard and maybe not make as much sense as a painting or a photograph. So the picture that you have in your image set is this one here, and it's the inside of this installation. So let me talk more about kind of background of our artist. So Osorio was born in Puerto Rico. So he's Puerto Rican, and he moved to New York City in 1975. And New York City has the largest community of Puerto Ricans outside of actual Puerto Rico itself. One of my best friends, her dad is Puerto Rican, and he grew up in New York City. So very, very large Puerto Rican community there. And he got a degree in sociology and became a social worker in South Bronx. And he was very impacted by the social problems in his own community. So we see his art kind of trying to work through those problems, help people start conversations. So his installations are installed in Latino communities in empty shops. So this was at one point an empty shop, and he transformed it into this artwork. And this is definitely for an audience. His intended audience is the Latinos who live in these neighborhoods. It's not for, me here in Indianapolis, but for the Latinos in South Bronx. And he, in creating these, collaborates with the residents to make works in which works that will start difficult conversations about the issues they're having in these communities. So this work specifically was, he was commissioned to create the work in Hartford, Connecticut, but he chose to install it in a Puerto Rican community. And here in this area, there had been a lot of gang violence. 16 people had died in the previous year. A lot of domestic violence. He talked to the residents and kind of found that they were having issues with, gang violence, domestic activity, the spread of AIDS during this time in the 90s. A lot of really difficult things. The space that he put this artwork in was originally a beauty parlor and then a church, and then Osorio transformed it into a barber shop. And he decided that he wanted to use a barber shop because it is a very culturally specific and gendered place, right? Barbershops are traditionally for men. It's this very masculine place. Maybe if we think of going to a salon, that's a very feminine place, but he specifically wanted to explore the Latino construction of masculinity, specifically machismo, which is just this kind of concept of masculinity within the Latino community. He wanted his artwork to have open, or to kind of lay the groundwork for open conversations about ideas of masculinity and machismo, how they are reinforced and how they have destructive consequences to individuals, families, and their neighborhood. So here we're talking about gender stereotypes with men. So let's go inside. I wish I had a video of this, but I don't. I just have pictures. We'll come back to that video later because it's not of this specific work. But inside the barbershop, this very traditionally masculine space, traditionally, Osorio is kind of taking the idea of a barbershop is this masculine place. Nothing feminine is allowed in there, like crying, right? Crying is heavily associated with kind of being female and with that kind of weakness. And he specifically remembers when he was little, he went to the barbershop with his dad, which was this big rite of passage for him to do, to go to the barbershop, and the barber turns on the clippers to give him his haircut, and he began crying. And he remembered his father saying no crying is allowed in the barbershop. So at a very young age, he was told, you know, man up, you can't cry. That's not what men do. And he strongly believes that teaching boys not to cry is kind of one of these foundational elements that boys learn when becoming a man, whether that is right or wrong. That is kind of the foundation from which this artwork came out of. So Osorio's barbershop had 4 barber chairs, like depicted here in your image set picture. These very masculine objects in this very masculine place. It's kind of like a little scavenger hunt to find all of the different like parts and pieces. Please remember that this is a completely constructed space by the artist. He put this all together himself very thoughtfully and carefully. So things that we'll find throughout this space: protein supplements, male hair products, sports trophies, framed photos of Latino entertainers, athletes, politicians, the kind of ideal Latino men. There's pictures of them. Each chair, if you look a little closer, down here we start to see some feet and some legs and a torso. So each of these chairs is silk screened with an adult male body. So there's kind of always this like very masculine male body sitting in this chair. But then there's this little TV up here. I'll let you look a little closer for a second. Each chair has a monitor on top of it with a silent video of a man crying. So all of this hyper masculine stuff put together, and then this almost too small head crying. The windows in the front of the building also had TVs in them that had the same footage in it. So we have very masculine things. We have kind of the depiction of the ideal man, these machismo elements, and then we have the very feminine things, right? These men crying. We have flowers on the wall. We have 2 roses, and these bullets here, which very much resembles like a tattoo design, but 2 very feminine motifs there. The wall itself is pink. I know it looks kind of a little bit, well, there's a pink wall and then yellow and pink wallpaper. So this might be the yellow wallpaper. I thought I had something about what that says, but I can't find it on my notes. Here's another view of this barber shop. We can see kind of more of the motifs. There's flowers scattered throughout. We have, I don't know what saint this is, but Catholicism is pretty popular throughout Latino communities. And maybe it's Saint Anthony. I don't know. But here we have a saint who was definitely martyred and physically injured in some way, probably alluding to physical strength, if I had to take a very informed guess. So Osorio throughout this, here's another view too. I think this says "Forgive me, Mother" on it. Someone's gonna be screaming at the screen while they're watching this, saying "Miss Bartell, Miss Bartell," and I'm sorry that we're not in a classroom together and you can't tell me. I think it says "Forgive me, Mother." Anyway, the videos. Back to the videos. Osorio invited men to appear in these videos, and they were installed in where the mirrors would have been. So about here. And they were videos of men in very masculine poses. They were lifting weights. They were showing off their tattoos. They were grabbing the crotches. All of these very kind of like masculine gestures. And then we have that juxtaposed with the videos of men crying in the chairs and on the windows. So through all of this juxtaposition, there's that word again. Michael Osorio is trying, not Michael Osorio. I got mixed up. I'm looking at Michael Tuffery on 236-37. Anyway, Osorio is trying to open up this community for conversations about their men, their masculinity. Like, do you have to be this super strong machismo man getting involved in all of this gang violence and domestic violence? What does it really mean to be a man? What does it really mean to be a good man? Should men be able to cry? Should men be able to express their emotions in a healthy way? Yes, absolutely. So the reactions from this community are pretty interesting and good. A lot of the women felt sympathy for the men, but a lot of them also felt disgust when they saw these videos of these men crying, because it was something that was so ingrained in them. Like, oh, you're not supposed to be doing that. That's gross. How emasculate. Some of the men were so moved by this exhibition and felt so kind of strongly about it that they joined the workshops that Osorio held for men, where they could talk about the pressures of being macho, the machismo. So this was very much kind of functioning as this installation, this happening, this performance piece, but also just as a way to, you know, have conversations and heal a community. Here's another picture of it. We have a pool table. Here you can see a little bit better some of our ideal men trophies here. Now we'll go back to that video. This is an installation that he did, different from ours, but interesting. So another installation Interesting there. I used that minute and a half to Google Translate what was on the wall, and it does say "Forgive me, Mother," so points for me for remembering that. But also forgetting it at the same time. I'm so sorry. Okay, so our last work. Let's go. This is Praying Mantra. Now, maybe this has a unicorn by it, or maybe it has a heart or a star sticker, but this one is very unusual looking, right? Okay, 247, Praying Mantra. Oh, I just watched a video where they say her name. We're gonna call her Mutu until we watch it again because I forget how to say her first name and I don't want to butcher it on YouTube. This is 2006 and it is mixed media on Mylar, which is just kind of like a clear plasticky surface that you can paint on. So, looking at this, knowing nothing about Mutu and her background, but knowing our whole history of art thus far, right? Art builds on art. Art takes ideas from previous artworks. We can definitely identify that we have some sort of reclining female nude figure here, but very different from what we are used to. And maybe it's kind of uncomfortable or unusual and you have a lot of questions about it. We have videos to start with, so we're going to start with just a short clip of this one here.
Wangechi Mutu is one of today's leading contemporary artists. She is best known for her intricate collages. They are beautiful and beguiling, while also provocative and disturbing. Mutu is a truly global artist, born in Kenya, schooled in Britain, and a graduate of Yale. She now lives and works in New York. Through art, she tackles issues that are some of the most relevant of our time: beauty and the female body, consumerism, post-colonialism, African identity, and the politics of violence.
Okay, so that was a very short introduction to watching. Oh no, we just watched that and I'm going to butcher it again. Mutu. So she creates work that involves the female body, ideas of kind of race and culture and post colonialism and feminism in a very interesting collage style. So, going back to this artwork here to look at. Mutu herself is this kind of cultural hybrid, like many people in this world are. She experienced and was shaped by multiple cultures in her lifetime. And she kind of explores the idea of being a hybrid from her experience in Kenya. I believe she grew up in Nairobi. She was educated in Europe and also in the US. Her art challenges our ideas about cultural identity, gender, sexuality, as this kind of new visual language, right? Art about ideas and concepts. So she described her childhood in Kenya, watching American TV shows and movies. And she realized watching these shows and movies that none of the people looked like her, right? She was African, she is African, and all of these people were white. And when there were people of color, they still didn't even really kind of look like her. They still looked different. There was something American about them, and they certainly didn't kind of feel like her and her personality and her experiences. And so her work involves entirely black female figures. And we talked yesterday about kind of the issues with depicting people of color throughout our history, their invisibility, the challenges, the way that they have been stereotyped. And she is also kind of challenging those stereotypes of women coming from kind of cultural myths, art of the past, modern advertising, etc. And so through her art, she's addressing beauty standards of the African female body as this thing that has been considered lesser, very sexualized, and also dangerous to Western standards. So let's dive into what she's actually depicting here. Those are some of her big ideas and content overall throughout her work. But praying mantra, maybe from the title you were kind of thinking like, ooh, praying mantis? That's correct. So I have this video and it's very silly and I wish that I could watch it with you in a classroom. But Spencer, this one is for you. I don't know how to make it bigger without whatever.
With front legs folded as if in prayer, the praying mantis is a master of deception. Because beneath this seemingly benign exterior lies an ambushed predator of blinding speed. Nearly 2,000 species of praying mantises are found around the world, each one an insatiable carnivore, each one capable of killing prey up to 3 times its size. The mantis feeds mostly on living insects, birds, mice, frogs, snakes, lizards, and soft-shelled turtles also cannot escape the deadly speed and precision of the praying mantis. One of its hunting tactics? Blending in. Mantises who live on the ground are spotted gray and brown to blend in with rocks and soil, while those in trees are camouflaged to mimic leaves, flowers, twigs, or bark. This camouflage allows them to sneak imperceptibly towards their prey, stalking like a cat or lying in wait near flowers that insects are likely to visit. The mantis spies its prey with a pair of large compound eyes, made of up to 10,000 miniature eyes. Humans have 2 eyes to distinguish how far away an object is, but the eyes of the mantis are too close together for such depth perception. To compensate, mantises eerily sway their heads back and forth, measuring precisely how their target moves against its background. These brilliant, unblinking predators can even turn their heads backwards to seamlessly track prey in any direction. And once the mantis is on the hunt, all of these elements come into play. Closer it creeps towards its...
Okay, I thought that was gonna automatically stop, but I guess it wasn't. So praying mantis. Mutu has transformed this female figure into basically a praying mantis. So she creates her artworks with or through collage techniques. So she uses found objects cut from magazines and combines them into this hybrid, right? That idea of being a cultural hybrid. So we have a reclining female figure here, a very traditional depiction of a woman throughout art history as an object in the seductive pose. But she has overlaid this kind of like mottled, like speckly texture onto her body. It almost feels kind of like bloody and violent. And it's almost like camouflage too, right? We watched that video with the praying mantis. It was silly, but praying mantises are also camouflaged, and she's kind of blending into the background of this tree and leaves back there. And she looks perfectly comfortable in her environment, right? She's blending right in. She's perfectly comfortable. It's us who's a little bit uncomfortable. The idea or the depiction of a female nude by trees alludes to biblical references like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and also Kenyan creation myths where women were seductresses in those kind of creation myths. So this idea of a female being this very kind of sexual being. And then if we go a little closer, we can see here that she has this green snake kind of wrapping around her, and that's another reference to Eve in the Garden of Eden. And then Through the collage technique, she's kind of cut out the female figure here and then also given her slightly bigger eyes, which I think is this allusion to the praying mantis and their big eyes. She has her hands aren't kind of in that prayer pose that we see associated with praying mantises, but her front legs are crossed, kind of like a praying mantis. And that's this kind of, she's comfortable, but she's like not reclining, relaxing. If we go back to our two depictions of reclining female nudes that we're most familiar with, we have um, Venus of Urbino here, who's like warm and soft and inviting, and then we have Olympia, who is the opposite of that. She's kind of suspicious, she's bored, she's not inviting. Our praying mantra here with her legs kind of crisscrossed like that, she is relaxed, but she is not our Venus of Urbino. So more praying mantis references. So why would she choose to, depict a female nude as this kind of predator, right? She's playing on the idea that women have been kind of prey for most of history. They have been subjected, they've been objects, they've undergone a lot of violence and oppression, and she turns this kind of very traditional female reclining nude into a predator. The praying mantis can eat lizards and frogs and camouflage and lure its prey. We also know that praying mantises have been known to eat their male partners after they mate, so this kind of suggestion of violence is almost empowering here. Here's another close-up of it. It's not a great picture. It's hard to find pictures of this piece. She's given her this kind of little feather crown back here with some pictures that she cut out of feathers. And then the cloth, the cloth that she has under her is supposed to look like, where is it? I lost it. Kuba cloth, made in Central Africa. So something similar, well, not similar because it's different, but kente cloth is the other type of cloth that we looked at. It's this very bold geometric cloth, something that is very African. So this cultural hybrid, right? Western reclining nude, African traditions. Okay. We'll go back to the big one to wrap up. So this is Praying Mantra, and it is a work that it's a portrait in a sense, but it's also kind of this concept of being a cultural hybrid, but also this feminine hybrid, right? Of being a sexual being, but being an empowered sexual being throughout this depiction of being a praying mantis, which brings me back full circle to our title. So if you look at praying mantis or praying mantra, we have the praying that is different from the actual name of a praying mantis. So a praying mantis is spelled with an A, like the act of praying, but this praying that we have here in the title refers to kind of being prey, being a predator preying on something. So we have that idea come full circle of being this very active person and female figure. So those are our three artworks today under our concept of gender and cultural stereotypes. Bye. Thanks for following along. Sorry for stumbling through that.